those who don't know, and for those who do, we have Bruce Moen again this year. We've had several speakers who've turned up at our Nexus conference 2 years running. This year it's Bruce Moen. And he's come all the way from Denver, Colorado. Bruce is actually out here on part of an extended tour that Nexus has been organising. He's been doing some talks and workshops in Queensland. Next weekend here in Sydney, he's doing a 2-day weekend workshop that's being held in a small room in the Seagull Townhouse. And there's still plenty of seats available for that if people want to go. He's also doing a longer 3-hour workshop presentation on Wednesday night here at the gazebo in this room. So please welcome him back, Bruce Moen.
Thanks, Duncan. Well, before I get started with my usual spiel, I need to make sure just how far I can go. I'm a sound man's nightmare. I'm a walker. You got to follow me with this camera and mic. First thing I'd like to do is express my appreciation to Duncan Rhodes and to Nexus magazine for bringing me back to Australia. I'm enjoying it here, and I'm enjoying the opportunity to share with people what I've learned through long experience. Has taken years to do. And to be able to come here and begin to teach in workshops the simple tools that allow anyone to learn to explore the afterlife on their own and determine for themselves whether there is such a place or not. Now, as those of you who were here last year know, I am just an ordinary guy. And I have never had a near-death experience. I've never been struck by lightning. I've never been hit by a car. I've never had those things happen. Because lots of people who talk about afterlife stuff have had one of these sort of cosmic bonks on the head that they come back from, and then they can talk about all this stuff. And which leads some of us to believe that we have to survive some sort of horrible, can't say that, catastrophe is an English or an American way of saying that that's not acceptable. You don't have to have anything quite so dramatic happen. I certainly never have. I'm just an ordinary guy with curiosity. I'm an ordinary guy who at the age of like 5 or 6 years old, walked around with these 3 questions. Where was I before I was here? And what am I supposed to do while I'm here? And where do I go when I leave here? I mean, I remember walking around as a 5-year-old kid wondering about that stuff. It wasn't until somewhere in my early 20s that I began to sort of go over this childhood daydream. I had a reoccurring daydream. How many of you would say that in your lifetime, since the time you were born until now, that you've had any kind of reoccurring dream? Yeah, there's over half of you who admit to having a reoccurring dream. This is nothing special. This is nothing out of the ordinary. This is ordinary stuff. So you're ordinary like I am. But in this reoccurring daydream I used to have as a kid, it always started the same way, no matter what I was doing. I mean, I could be a 5-year-old boy sitting with my road grader and my trucks in the sandbox, playing like an ordinary kid, and this daydream would start. And when it started, it was always the same. It would start out that suddenly it was nighttime. And I could see the stars, I could see there were no street lights. I could see that there was an alley on this side, and I could see that there was this white stucco house on this side, and there was another one just a little ways away behind me, same kind of house. And I could see that I was standing in front of some stairs, and I started walking up the stairs. That's how the daydream always started. And I'd get to the top of the landing, and I'd open the door, and about halfway down on the left-hand side, there's a dresser, maybe with a candle on it. I can see that the ceiling in this second floor room is the bottom of the roof, running off that way. And I can see that there's a kind of a white cotton curtain sort of lightly fluttering in the breeze on the far wall, which is about from here to that wall away. And I can see this huge brass rail bed. Well, this is as a 5-year-old boy. I want to emphasize that. Because in the brass rail bed there's this woman. And she has this look in her eye and this way she's motioning that drew me into the room. And I remember walking around the far side of the bed, and I remember getting into the bed with the woman, and I remember all this bouncing around that I had no idea as a 5-year-old what was going on, but I knew I enjoyed whatever it was. Until I'd hear these heavy footsteps coming up the same stairs I had just come up just a short while ago. And every time in the daydream when those footsteps started, there was something right in here that when you're really terrified jumps into your throat. It jumped into my throat. And I can remember I sort of rolled off the woman so that I was laying on my back, she's over here, and I'm looking over toward the door as it opens up. And there's this guy standing in the doorway who's big. I mean, he's huge. His bulk fills the entire doorway, and the top of his hat is brushing the door jamb. He's huge. And I'm feeling this just total terror, knowing that if he gets a hold of me, I'm dead or worse. Of course, as a 5-year-old, I didn't know what dead was, and I wasn't sure what worse than dead would be, but I knew during the daydream what I had to do. I threw off this whatever kind of blanket it was and ran naked, going head first, diving for the window. And as soon as my fingertips touched that cotton curtain, the daydream would just end. Somewhere in my 20s, I had good reason to remember that daydream. I was smart enough to stay on first-floor buildings. But I had good reason to remember that daydream. And that started me wondering, where does a 5-year-old boy, raised in Alaska, I mean this is like 1953. They didn't have television when I moved to Alaska, and when I was 6 or 7 they got one channel that broadcast like from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. That's all they did. But I knew even with that, there were no movies on TV like that in 1953. And I knew that, knowing my parents, if there had been movies like that at the theater in 1953, they wouldn't have taken a 5-year-old kid to it. They probably wouldn't take me to it now. Anyway, I began to wonder just how does a 5-year-old boy know about these things? How does he know about brass rail beds and women? And how does he know about what they were doing? And how does he know the terror of a man standing in a doorway who wants to kill you or worse? How does a 5-year-old boy know that? I did a lot of reading, I did a lot of research, I asked a lot of questions. And my final decision was, the only thing that makes sense is I was remembering the last few minutes of a time before I was here, in a place that was different than I was living then, under circumstances that were different, in which I jumped out a second-story window to avoid a jealous husband who had been waiting for me in the alley. Reincarnation became the truth for me. And it's a long, complicated subject, and we could talk about it at great length, but suffice it to say, I decided that's pretty clear indication that at least some part of me had lived before I was here. And so that and researching that sort of area a little more convinced me that I've got the answer to my first question. I know where I was before I was here. In one lifetime I was jumping out that window. Well, my middle question as a kid was, what am I supposed to do while I'm here? Which was entirely too big a question. I had no way to even begin to think about it. And so I began to focus on my third question, where do I go when I leave here? As I mentioned before, I'm a person with lots of curiosity. Maybe lots isn't the right word, maybe intense is a better word, maybe obsessive is a better word to describe the level of curiosity I experience about things. I did lots of reading, lots of studying. I mean, I've read a stack of books probably that big. and came to the conclusion that if there was an afterlife, if people really continued to live beyond this physical time, that where they were was very close to the same place people go when they dream. Might sound like kind of a big stretch to get to such a conclusion, but believe me, I took a long time getting there. Well, that left me with, well, if I want to explore to find out whether or not this afterlife is real, then it's really pretty simple. All I have to do is learn to become aware while I'm dreaming. And once I'm aware while I'm dreaming, I'm in the right neighborhood, then I should be able to wander around the neighborhood and find dead people and talk to them. And I worked pretty hard at lucid dreaming and had a couple lucid dreams. And the result of one of those led me to Bob Monroe's Journeys Out of the Body, and it talked about this out-of-body experience, and I was hooked. Because I understood, in my own way, that what Monroe was talking about was a far more conscious way of exploring non-physical realities. That in his out-of-body experience, he had discovered a way to explore the neighborhood. That began a period of many years in which I quested after the holy grail of out-of-body experience. I'm obsessive. I mean, ask Farron, my wife, she's here. I'm obsessive. And I struggled for a long time to have this out-of-body experience stuff happen and to get control of it so I could, at will, do it. Well, that never happened. I've probably been out of body in the classic sense maybe 5 times in my life. And when I say classic sense, I mean the classic out-of-body experience that Monroe described. Feeling like you're floating, looking down, seeing yourself on the bed, realizing, that's my physical body and this is something else. Great, I'm where I want to go, I'm out of here. Well, I never got control of it. But in my quest to get control of it, I discovered that this Monroe guy had founded a place called the Monroe Institute in Virginia. And following my curiosity there to learn to do this out-of-body stuff, which never really happened, I heard about a program called Lifeline. A Lifeline was advertised as a program in which you learn to shift your awareness from this reality we're sharing right now to a reality or several realities in which dead people were living, is one way to say it. Another way to say it would be people were non-physically living. Now we get to this imaginary whiteboard. Monroe described, Monroe described a structure. Let's draw it this way. He described a structure that he found in his explorations. And as a result of going to his Lifeline training, I was able to learn to explore these same areas that Monroe had described, as have hundreds, if not thousands, of other people who have attended this Lifeline program. The first area that we'll put on the board, we'll make kind of a dividing line over here, and put C1. I'll put it big so you can all read it. C1. C1 defines an area of consciousness, an area of human consciousness that we might call physical reality. Most of us right now are, at least to some extent, focused in physical reality, C1. The numbers aren't important. In fact, one of the things Monroe said was that he gave it these labels because if he used the kinds of words used to describe these places that other people had, it would carry all this baggage, and so he described it in a different way. And there were several sort of intermediate focus levels, he called them, various areas of consciousness, until you got to another dividing line that had Focus 21. Make sure I spell it right here. Focus 21. Focus 21, on this side of the line, Monroe described as the last area of physical consciousness. There are a number of areas of physical consciousness, and Focus 21 was the boundary between physical consciousness and non-physical consciousness. Well, after learning to explore that place, I began to explore beyond physical consciousness. In this next one, I'm glad this board is so big. Usually I have to write this in a column, but I now realize I can write it this way. I can write Focus 22. Focus 22 is an area of human consciousness that really is not rightly called afterlife. It's an area of human consciousness, and I should say that from Focus 22 on, Monroe described these areas based on the kinds of people he found there. On Focus 22, the kinds of people you find there, and I've explored that place, the kinds of people you find there are people who are maybe in a coma. They're not really totally here physically. People who are drunk, passed out drunk, pretty sure they're going to be there. Drugged, insane. And I'm convinced that there are mental institutions in the States, and probably here, where the people who are being treated for various psychiatric disorders like schizophrenia have their awareness focused in this area of Focus 22, this very chaotic area, this area where the people who are there, and if they're not just in a coma and sleeping, or sometimes dreaming, I'm convinced that sometimes our ordinary dreams happen in this Focus 22 place, which is why sometimes our dreams appear to be so chaotic and strange. And why sometimes we feel like we're being chased by something. But I'm convinced some people just have their awareness in Focus 22, and they make the mistake of telling somebody about that experience, and that somebody has the power to drug them. Focus 22 is kind of a chaotic area. It's not an area that I find any real value in exploring, except to know, yeah, it's there. Okay, sometimes as I'm drifting off to sleep, I may sort of pass into it, and if it seems real chaotic, well, that's where I am. The next area of human consciousness is one that Monroe labeled Focus 23. Make sure I get the line there and write Focus. Is that big enough you can see it in the back? 23. I thought so. Focus 23 is an area of consciousness, again, defined by the kind of people you meet there. It's an area of human consciousness that really the first area of our afterlife. Afterlife. I mean, there's no such thing as an afterlife. I have to keep using the word so you understand, I mean, the difference between being in C1 consciousness and being somewhere 23 or beyond, but there's no such thing as afterlife. There's only life. Our existence is eternal. Eternal life is not something you earn, it's unavoidable. Just kind of only decision you have to make is how you want to experience eternity. Well, Focus 23 is an area of human consciousness in which the people who inhabit that place are people who are physically dead, so they're non-physically living. And these people have some common characteristics, or characteristics that are common to others in that area. One of those characteristics is that very often they don't know they're dead. An example of someone I went to check on, a woman named Sylvia, who had died, didn't know it. And her husband, who was still physically living, was having trouble sleeping at night, and when I asked her to show me what she was doing with Joe, her husband, she walked into the bedroom, and she walked right through the mattress of the bed that Joe was laying in. The edge of the mattress was behind her, her legs were sticking through it. Never even occurred to her. And she reaches down through the mattress, gets her arms under Joe and kind of lifts her up, and her arms go right through him. And it disturbs Joe's sleep. She didn't know she was dead. And didn't even notice that she'd walked through the mattress or that her arms had gone through Joe and come back up. It just never registered. She didn't know she was dead. That's one of the very common characteristics of people in this Focus 23 area of human consciousness, that they don't know they're dead. These people are also isolated. They're stuck. They're alone. And what I mean by that is that their awareness is focused still at a level of human physical consciousness, physical world consciousness. As far as they're concerned, they're still physically alive. And so they can still see you and me. They can still hear what we say. They can still hear what we think. And in fact, Sylvia expressed to me that she was really upset with her husband, Joe. She said, "He ignores me. I follow him around talking to him. He acts like I'm not even there." It upset her greatly that Joe was ignoring her, and she was angry with him. She could still see Joe, she could still hear Joe, but she was what we call a ghost. She was a person who was stuck in Focus 23. She was a person who the only people she could talk to were physically living people, and almost none of them knew she was even around. She was never even aware that there were other non-physical people around her trying to get through to her. Because for her, these other people, helpers I'll be talking about in a bit, these other people, these non-physical helpers who would come all the time trying to get her attention and try to help her out of where she was stuck. To Sylvia, those people were like ghosts to us. They might be there, just like they might be in this room right now. I mean, they could be over here jumping up and down on the stage making all kinds of strange faces. And none of us are laughing at them because none of us can see them. Well, it was the same thing for Sylvia. So there are these two common characteristics. Typically, they don't know they're dead. And really one of the reasons they're still stuck is they still have their awareness focused at the physical level of consciousness. So they can see into the physical world, but they can't see into the non-physical world even though they live there. This idea of being stuck is really part of how I learned to explore the afterlife and how I teach it in my workshop. Because the Lifeline program taught a method by which I could learn to find these people who were stuck and communicate with them. And because I'm still a physically living person, and since my awareness is still running this body, I'm still at the area of consciousness they are in. We're both sort of meet in this Focus 23. We both have some of our awareness focused at C1. So in the process that I learned in Lifeline was a process in which I learned to find these people, or actually be guided to them, get their attention, talk to them, join into their reality, gather as much evidence as I could that this was maybe a real experience, and then to introduce them to the fact that there are these other non-physical people, helpers, I call them. Helpers. You might call them angels, you might call them guides, you might have any number of names for the people I call helpers. But helpers are they're people just like you and me, in that all the ones I've ever met, well, with the exception of one, all the ones I've met have had physical lifetimes, just like we're having now. But when they left this reality and went to that one, they decided to be helpers. They decided that they'd like to assist people, that they'd like to see if they can't get a hold of some of these people who are stuck and help them get out. Well, in the process that I learned in the Lifeline program, once I'd gotten this dead person's attention, sort of joined into their reality, I could invite them to go to a place where they had more choices, to go to a place where there were other people that could see them and talk to them. And in the process I learned, I then allowed this helper to sort of transport us to another place we'll talk about in a bit, which is over here called Focus 27. It's not on the board yet, though. You don't have to remember it yet. Well, that process is a process called retrieval. And it's the way I learned to explore the afterlife. Turned out, in the beginning, I thought it was kind of a be-all, end-all. I thought, oh, this retrieval thing is good. You know, gives me something to focus my attention on. I can go find these people and I can help them out. And I felt some compassion for these people who were stuck. Compassion. I do a 2-day workshop and just recently compressed it down to 2.5 hours, and I did it here in Sydney a couple weeks ago. And in this workshop, we do a retrieval exercise. I teach people to do that. Compassion and being stuck reminds me of one of the experiences of a person in that workshop. The procedure she was taught was to ask for a helper to come, and this helper would guide her to the person need to be retrieved, and all of that. And she said when she talked about her experience afterwards, she said, you know, I only expected maybe some impressions. But when she asked for a helper to come, a clown walked up. Big red nose, bowler hat, red hair, white face, clown shirt, whatever that looks like, big bow tie, polka dot pants, big boots. She thought it was kind of strange that a helper would look like that. But when the helper guided her to someone who needed to be retrieved, someone who could use her services, she found herself in a hospital room. She said, I think it might have been a hospital in Sydney. And she was standing in the room looking at a little boy who was laying on a bed, and the curtains pulled around him. She described him as a little boy who was kind of frail, short dark hair. His name was Jamie, she said. And the story that unfolded was that Jamie had gotten sick. And it got to the point where he could no longer go to school, he could no longer play with his friends, he was finally put in a hospital. And as he approached death, his parents, particularly his mother, were quite upset that he was dying, and would always tell Jamie, you know, Jamie, please don't die. Stay here, Jamie. Don't leave. And the lady who did the retrieval said that Jamie told her that they'd switched off all the equipment and they'd pull the curtain, and he was still waiting for Mom, because he was staying like he was supposed to. He was still waiting for Mom, but she hadn't come to see him, and he wasn't sure what was going on. Jamie had died. And the way he was stuck was into trying to fulfill the wish of his mother to stay. So there's lots of ways to get stuck. Sometimes we create a reality for ourselves in which we don't understand that we're dead, and there are lots of ways to do that. And in Jamie's case, he created a reality in which he was going to stay for Mom. Unfortunately, Mom didn't realize he was still there. So there are lots of ways to get stuck. And this retrieval process is a process in which you learn how to find these folks, kind of introduce them to the idea that maybe they're no longer physically living, if that's appropriate, and then help them out of there. The next area of consciousness that Monroe talked about, beyond Focus 23, was an area that he labeled belief system territories, and he gave it focus numbers 24, 25, and 26. Belief system territories. These are places where people are stuck after they die, but they're not stuck alone. They're stuck more in groups. And the way I would describe that is that I was raised as a Lutheran. Well, more accurate to say somewhere around age 13, my parents decided I should go to confirmation, and the Lutheran church was close. And one of my parents was Lutheran, so that's where I went. I'm afraid it was too late for them. Anyway, in the belief system territories, I know that the Lutheran Church describes a particular version of heaven. And everyone who subscribes to that set of beliefs about an afterlife in which they go to heaven, that shares the Lutheran version of that, I understand that there's a place maybe in Focus 24 and 25 and 26, kind of an oval place, that is that Lutheran heaven. Human beings can create a reality for themselves in which they become stuck alone, or human beings can create realities for each other in which they can be stuck together. So I know that somewhere in this belief system territory's place, Lutheran heaven is there. And all those good Lutherans who have a clear picture of what it's supposed to be like and believe they should go there, that's where they go. Not all of them. Some of them. Because not everybody gets stuck. I don't want to get that across. That's not true. I also know that Lutherans preached about a hell. And they give you a pretty clear picture of what that's like. And it doesn't sound very pleasant. And I also know that that reality that's created by this group of humans exists somewhere in the belief system territories. And anyone who believes it's there and believes they should go there is a candidate to go there. So the belief system territories are areas where when people die, if they don't manage to sort of slide by there, they may be attracted into one of these places where people go, and the only other people that are there are people who share their same beliefs. There's nobody else there. There are no Catholics in Lutheran heaven. There are no Muslims in Jewish heaven, if the Jews have a heaven. So all these people share the same set of beliefs. In the next book, which is supposed to come out early next year, I'll be talking about, you'll read about what you're going to hear now. And that is that my curiosity again led me to really want to know about this belief system territory area and really want to know what was in there and who lived there and why and how and all of that. And when I was wondering about that, a friend of mine named Denise, who lives in Reno, Nevada, which is a long ways from where I live in Denver, Denise and I used to do what's called partnered exploring. Partnered exploring is a technique in which Denise and I agreed to meet non-physically at a particular place. And we always came with a list of questions. And once we met non-physically, we'd go off to find our answers to our questions. I mean, a friend of ours always met us, someone who died a while ago. And he'd been living there long enough, he kind of knew the neighborhood and the neighbors. And so we'd come with our questions, you know. Well, these are our questions, you know. Who can we talk to? I've got just the guy for you. Well, Denise and I did this every Tuesday and Thursday for about 3 months. And one of our little explorations, or forays, as Denise liked to call them, we wanted to know about hell. Is there such a place as hell? Is it really there? And if it is, what's it like? And so we came with our questions. And in this partnered exploring technique, the way it's done is you go with your questions, you talk to somebody who maybe has some answers, and then you come back into C1 consciousness, this physical consciousness, and I make all my notes about what I remember the experience, and Denise makes all her notes, and she's in Reno and I'm in Denver, and then we email our notes back and forth. And then I look for my experience in her notes, and she does the same with mine. Well, anyhow, when we went to check on, is hell real? The tour guide that showed up, I'll call Mike just because I need a name, makes it easier to talk about. Mike was my tour guide. Now, Mike had been in a hell. He had been in Thief's Hell. Turns out, There are hells for all different kinds of folks. And during Mike's lifetime, he had been a thief. Now, some of you may know a thief.